could you imagine if someone like loses the world championship because of lag?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another amazing episode of the Third Shield Pokemon Go PvP podcast. Today, I have Rise to Occasion himself. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here on a podcast. I did a radio show when I was in college. It's been a while since I've done any sort of thing like that or a podcast, so I'm excited.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for taking the time because I know you're busy, you're streaming, you're putting out content. I want to call you because you are one of the first professional Pokemon Go players out there, which is true. And before anybody questions that, it is happening just like with Speedy as Chief 2 and now with you, and then your team is actually growing by the minute. But before we talk about that, I just wanted to mention that so people know where you're coming from. I just wanted to ask you, how did you do so far this season?
This Go Battle League season, there's always kind of an ebb and flow of the season. You have your moments where you're climbing high, you have your days where you're struggling. So I'd say I started off pretty strong. When I got to like the 2900s range, I was stuck in the 2900s for like weeks, not weeks, maybe like 1 week. So it seemed like I was stuck there for ages. And the crazy thing was, like, I didn't get much lower than like 2900, and I didn't get much higher than like 2960. So I was in like a 60-point elo spot for like a week. But eventually I broke through on Go Battle Day, actually, the first one, I think. And so since then, it's been going pretty well. I think I'm at like 3,300 right now, so a pretty high elo.
I'm pretty sure there's so many people who are different elo, even in the 2100s to all the way to 3000s, and they just stuck. My question is, did you do something differently, or did you stick with the same team? Did you swap out maybe leads or change the teams?
Honestly, I don't think I changed too much around. I think it was Master Classic is when I hit it. And I was running one team for a while that was getting stuck. And then I switched up based off what I was seeing. And I realized my team and a lot of the teams that I was seeing was really weak to Mamoswine. So I started running Mamoswine in the lead, and that kind of became the MVP. And it wasn't like instantaneously, like I switched Mamoswine, boom, legend. But it was like I swapped Mamoswine, and then I started getting the hang of that team. And then that team got more favorable leads, more favorable winnable games than my other team, and eventually was able to push through. So it was just a slight team adjustment, just kind of noticing what a lot of teams were weak to and plugging that Pokemon in was the main thing. That's part of being successful in Go Battle League, is really dominating with one team, or learning the ins and outs of one team is a great place to start. And the example I always think of is Wholesome _ the streamer, because he has that Machamp, Alolan Muck, Snorlax team that he's run for like 6 seasons or whatever, that he just knows the ins and outs of. And dude, when I play Wholesome in Ultra League, I know his team and I still lose somehow. Like I know what his 3 is, but he knows his team so well that it doesn't even matter. And he can oftentimes pull out crazy wins.
Yeah, I did a podcast with Wholesome as well, guys. I will link it in below because we talked about it, actually, his team that he uses every season. I was blown away. I went to watch his stream after we did a podcast, actually, using that team that night. And then there were people, just like you said, know his team. And then they are even in the chat and they still lose to Wholesome, during the battles. And I'm like, he's just so good with it. He knows. And that's a really good advice, what you said, because he 100% knows the ins and outs of that team. He has a good connection with it. He knows what he can. It just was absolutely amazing. All the swaps, what he can tank, what he can take. It's really cool. Let's go back at the beginning before we go into the pro section of this. So what I wanted to ask you is, when and how did you get started? You can start with Pokemon, and then we transfer into Pokemon Go, whichever you like. Just take us back a little bit.
Yeah, so we can go way back. When I was maybe like 5 years old, I started doing karate in my local town. I live near Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I started doing karate. And I remember a kid named Patrick, who was like same age as me, would bring his Pokemon cards, and he brought like his Game Boy Advanced. And that's where I kind of learned about it. So he kind of introduced me to Pokemon. Shout out to Patrick, wherever he is today. And it was all the rage, of course, where Pokemon Go came out. Obviously, I should specify. And I remember my basketball teammates, like guys that probably were not into Pokemon. Like we were all going to the park and playing. There was people with like graduation parties that summer, and there's people like playing Pokemon Go at the graduation parties. And it was so awesome. Well, I took like a 2-year hiatus. I had studied abroad in Greece my junior year of college. And I come back that summer, and my buddy Phil, who was like one of my best friends growing up, like, hey, Chris, like, you want to hang out? Like, I saw you got back. I'm like, yeah, sure. And I notice he's playing Pokemon Go on his phone. I'm like, dude, like, you still play that game? And he's like, yeah, dude, like, they've added all this stuff. They've added like raids. And then before you know it, Go Battle League becomes a thing. And that is what really kind of got me back into it. And I've always been more of a competitive type of player. Being able to play Go Battle League and actually battle each other is kind of what sparked my interest back in the game. And the rest is kind of history.
If there was, because there's esports betting for games. So if there was like a Pokemon Go gets on like on the betting website, and you can actually bet that, let's say you are battling it out with King IV, you know, on stream yeah. or something, and you actually go and bet. I think I would be hooked. Like I would be looking at that all day long and try to make even small bets. I don't want to, lose too much. But the point is, some people would live their life on it. I think it would be epic, or will be epic. I think it's happening.
That's actually a really cool idea, because one thing I always say with this game is the best of the best, like there's such a little skill gap between all the best players that really anybody could win on any given day, especially when you see these big tournaments that are going on some of these days with like Antimatter Gaming and these $1,000 tournaments they're putting on. It's really anybody's game when you have a bunch of really talented battlers in there. So betting could be super interesting and profitable, because it's really like it's really 50-50 when you're talking about the best of the best.
When you jumped into it, what did you think of it? And then how did you decide, or what did you do to, start improving your skills and start competing, up there with legends, or actually even hitting legend? Like, was that a goal, or how did you go about it?
That's a great question. So I think one thing that helped me was from playing the main series games growing up, I already kind of knew my typings, and I already knew what was super effective against what. And just by knowing like he swapped in a fire type, I should swap in my water type. That helped me be decent at the game at the start. I had no idea. I remember, because I think I found out about Go Battle League at the start of season 1 of Go Battle League. There had already been a preseason, and I found out about it for season 1. So I was a little bit behind the game, but I remember just trying out different Pokemon. I didn't really know about PvPoke or the community all that much at that point in time. And I remember like, oh my gosh, Whiscash is insane. It gets to these mud bombs so fast. So like, I didn't know anything about energy or counting moves at that point, but just by knowing my typings and being like quick on reactions, I was already able to at least compete. And I remember getting to like the 2900s in my very first season of doing Go Battle League. So like, without even being that knowledgeable about the game mechanics or anything, I was able to get pretty close to rank 10 at the time, and like the equivalent of legend. And then going about improving, that's when I started looking at content. And I think the first content creator I started watching was FP Sticks, and I watched his videos and I learned all sorts of stuff about counting moves. Because before that, I was really just going off of feel. Like, I think he's going to throw now. Season 3 of Go Battle League, I didn't hit legend. And it was such a change. It was like season 1, like, oh, I was pretty close, but like legend, oh, that's such a tough thing to do. Season 2, I do hit it, and I hit it and kind of blow it out of the water. it almost became like, oh, I can definitely do it against season 3. And then I didn't hit it season 3. I got to like 29 something. And then on the last day, I like fell. I like had a bad day and I tanked back down to like 2,700 or something. So after not hitting it and feeling like, I feel like I've gotten better as a battler, how did I get worse this season? I had to start to reflect on my own skills, and think about like, what can I do better? Look at my gameplay, like what am I doing wrong? And that's when I went from like kind of already taking it seriously to taking it like really seriously, and analyzing my own gameplay, getting in a lot of Sylph reps. And I think that's kind of the turning point where my growth went from like being like positive to being like exponential as a battler.
Now that you know what you know, if you go back in time and meet yourself when you just starting Go battling against Sylph, what do you think you would tell yourself like as the most important thing you need to learn? What would be like a number one that you would tell yourself that this is what you need to focus on?
I think focusing on learning the energy of the moves themselves, I think is the biggest thing. Knowing the moves in their energy is so valuable because you're not relying on like trying to know the counts of when they get to the move. It's not like trying to memorize that that Venusaur gets to Frenzy Plant in 6 Vine, which you can do, and that's what I recommend to players to do, because keeping track of the exact energy can be really tough. But I think it's more valuable to know the energy of the move and keep track of that Pokemon's energy than it is to rely on like trying to count the moves and trying to remember. I think it's 7 to Sludge Bomb, or is it 6, and not knowing. But knowing that Sludge Bomb is 50 and Vine Whip is however many is valuable to. So I would say that as the number one thing. Yes, number 2, I would say, next to that is minimizing mistakes. And one thing I've learned from battling against a lot of these top players, because I competed in like Sylph Worlds last season against Vani and all sorts of top players. Vani's currently ranked number 1 on Sylph. And I've noticed from playing against like him and Ventusky and Doombug, the top players, it's not like they're making these crazy sack swaps and 1,000 IQ galaxy brain plays. It's normally they're just not making any mistakes. They're not throwing at the wrong time. They're timing their moves correctly. They're switching quickly. They're not like hesitating, like, should I switch? Should I stay? And then they switch. I think it's trying to minimize your mistakes rather than focusing on like trying to make the crazy sack swaps and the crazy plays.
What do you think about esports possibilities? You mentioned a little bit of it in the future. How far do you see that it's actually going to happen when there are teams like Mazers? There are events that they are already hosting in the future. And basically just like a real thing that we look forward to. Like each year there's like a World Championships like we have it in London. Where you are at with that basically in your mind?
I think it's tough to tell at this point in time. And I think, like you said, it's going to start with Niantic and the state of the game and improving it, because if it's going to be such a bad look at these World Championships, if someone lags out or misses a bunch of fast moves and they have to do a rematch, and let's say someone like they pretty much had the game guaranteed, but then they lag out and they have to rematch, like they just don't get afforded the win. Could you imagine if someone like loses the World Championship because of lag? That would just be horrible. And I think that would like really dent any chance of this becoming an esport until they fix that. So I think it starts with the state of the game. And that said, if they can rewrite the code, like people have been saying with Pokeminers for PvP, and eliminate a lot of these inconsistencies with fast moves and lag and weird glitches where like they catch the move, but you don't visibly see them catch the move. It's still the same Pokemon. If they can fix all that, I think there is definitely a lot of promise to becoming an esport, because already with organizations like Mazer and Antimatter putting out these $1,000 tournaments like month to month, it shows that there is interest there. from sponsors and stuff, and it can only grow larger. And I mean, once you start to get maybe content creators from like the larger overall Pokemon scene start to endorse it and say like, oh, hey, this is cool. Like there's a $5,000 prize for this Pokemon Go tournament. I think it can only grow higher and higher. So starts with the state of the game. And hopefully if that improves, it could, who knows, it could be as big as the other Pokemon games in terms of esports.
I mean, just like you mentioned, the big names. I mean, we have, and yeah, perfect. I mean, we got tons of answers for all the questions. I'm very excited to actually put this out there. And thank you so much for coming on again. And guys, thank you so much for listening. If you were listening, don't forget, it's also on video on YouTube, which we will link below. If you're watching, it's also on audio. So make sure you check both out. And thank you so much for being here, guys. We'll see you on the next one.